Welcome to Attainable Green. I'm Jess, and today we're going to be talking about the Angraecum leonis. This is a care collab video with Karen's Orchids, Ninja Orchids, and Tropical Plants Finland. We're going to share how we take care of this plant in our different environments and setups, and hopefully these will all be helpful for you. So let's dive right in. I have two Angraecum leonis plants. One is considered the Comoros Island form, and the other one is the Madagascar form. There is not a whole lot of information in regards to how to take care of this plant, much less the differences between the two varieties. I did a quick guide on this in a previous video, so you can refer to that if you want more information. For this video, I'm going to share my experiences growing this plant in my environment. So I'm going to give a little history about how I came to acquire these plants and a little bit of history about them. That way you won't have too many questions about why these plants look the way they do. So I got the Angraecum leonis Comoros Island variety from a US nursery. And this one has been cultivated in a greenhouse, so it looks very healthy and lush. Even though this plant is fairly large and it looks great, it actually hasn't bloomed yet. So I'm still trying to figure out how to bloom this plant. So the second leonis is the Madagascar form, and this one is smaller and more compact. I got this plant from a orchid pre-sale from the Louisiana Orchid Connection. This plant was actually wild collected, so that accounts for the state that the orchid was in and why it looks the way it does. The pre-sales allow for wild collected plants to be shipped from Madagascar to the United States legally. Whether or not wild collected plants is a viable way to get orchids can be controversial. So I'm not going to talk about that here, but I just want to let you know that this plant is wild collected. Now that I know a little bit more about growing orchids and the orchid industry in general, I personally would not recommend getting wild collected plants. This was a barewood plant that was probably out of its media and out of its normal environment for several weeks to several months. It took a while for this plant to arrive to the United States, and once I got it, it definitely looked dehydrated. Not only that, you can tell it's an older plant, it's been subject to the elements, and it definitely doesn't look like it was grown in a greenhouse under perfect conditions. So that's why this particular plant looks not in the healthiest state. I spent the past year and a half growing both of these plants so that they're relatively in healthy condition. So I'm going to give a little bit of information about its care and how I grow it. So I grow both of these plants in my side yard, and I stay in my humidity tent. It gets a decent amount of light during the growing season, and then during the winter time it's in bright shade. I would say it gets about 8 to 10 hours of sunlight during the growing season, and the rest of the time it's in partial or bright shade. As for temperature, it can handle down to 40 degrees Fahrenheit up to 100 degrees during the hottest times of the year. As long as I keep the plants well hydrated during the hot times of the season, they do fine. And during the cooler temperatures, I just keep the plant dry. In its natural habitat, the Angraecum leonis tends to have a drier in winter period. It's not to say that it gets no water at all, but that I kind of maintain enough moisture and humidity so the plants don't completely dry out. On average, it has a humidity between 40 and 60%. However, during the drier winter season, it can dip to about 30% humidity. And during the hot growing season, when everything is being watered constantly, it can get up to 100% humidity in the growing tent. As for watering, during the winter season, I water about once a week, once every other week, just because these plants tend to stay drier in the winter time. I just want to maintain the plant so it doesn't start shriveling as much, and I just want to maintain the health of the root system. During the winter time, if you water too much, these plants are prone to rot. So that's why I kind of back off the watering during the winter time. During the growing season, I water these plants heavily, and it doesn't seem to mind. In fact, I think it actually can take a whole lot more water than you think. And because of the media, the choice I use, it can handle having a lot of water. As for fertilizer, I think these plants can do well with fertilizer or without. So for my Madagascar form, I haven't actually been able to give fertilizer to this plant just because of the way I water currently, and I use slow release fertilizer. And in my current setup with this pot, there's nowhere where I could put the fertilizer where it just wouldn't fall through and disappear out of the pot. So right now, both of these plants don't get any fertilizer. I may have to change that this year so that I could keep and maintain the health of the plant, but for now, I'm okay not giving fertilizer to my leonis. So as for media, the Madagascar form is potted up in a terracotta pot with charcoal and a bit of sphagnum moss. And I think it seems to like and enjoy that environment. So far it's doing great. You can see root tips around the rim of the pot. As for the Comoros Island form, it's potted up in a mix of bark and moss. And so far, I think it's doing well. I may have to repot it this year because it looks like some of the roots have died off during the winter season. So I may have to repot that to just double check and see how everything is doing. So when it comes to repotting, I've actually only repotted one of these plants, which was the Madagascar form, and that's because I got the plant bare root. And I potted this one up in about early March of last year, and so far it's been doing well. I think March is kind of the sweet spot because that's right when the new roots are starting to emerge, and the old roots are also starting to pick up and come into growth. I think the spring is probably the best time to repot the Angraecum leonis because I heard that it doesn't like to be repotted. So you want to just time it to when the new roots are growing so that you'll have less setback and less trouble. I know some people like to mount the leonis, and that seems to work for them really well. And in my setup, I try to keep it as airy as possible. As for problems with this plant, luckily I haven't really had any major issues with these plants. Both of them have been growing fairly well for me. The only thing I would say is that I got a little bit of sunburn on some of the leaves because I put them in too bright of a light too quickly. They can adjust to different levels of light, and I think they can do fine as long as they are gradually adjusted. The other thing is that I haven't been able to rebloom the Comoros Island form, so I'm hoping to increase the light incrementally so that it has more than it did last year, and hopefully that will induce the plant to bloom. I tend to see a lot of people growing these plants, but I haven't seen a lot of them blooming them. And so I don't have any advice about how to bloom these plants. In fact, I'm still trying to figure it out myself. There's not a lot of literature about these plants, and it's not a lot of studies that have been going on. So I'm just trying to record what I know and my experiences, so hopefully it'll be helpful to you. So that's how I take care of the Angraecum leonis, and I hope you will check out all the other YouTubers and their channels on how they grow this plant. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel to follow along on more orchid updates. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!